Some authors are outgoing spotlight lovers who shine at readings. But some of the rest of us are not so confident when we read our work aloud. However, readings are a part of the writing industry. Your fans want to meet you. They want the opportunity to hear you read your work and ask you questions. So, today I want to talk about reaching your fans, how to give an author reading. These tips are designed to make the reading more fun for your listeners and less stressful for you. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's start with choosing an excerpt to read. Which piece of your writing you choose to read is going to be the difference between your listeners actively participating in your reading or surfing their phones. I know that's a lot of pressure, but the excerpt really matters. If you choose the right excerpt, it will linger with your listeners long after they've left your reading. That will keep you and your book top of mind. So the first thing you need to do when choosing your excerpt is be aware of your time limit. Regardless of how formal the reading is, you're likely given a time slot in which to read. You need to stay within that time slot. A good rule of thumb, if you're writing prose, is 2.5 to 3 double-spaced 12-point font pages takes about 5 minutes to read. That should give you a rough idea of the size of the excerpt you're looking at. Don't try and read faster to fit in more words. When you do that, you sound rushed and nervous, and you might be reading so fast that your listeners can't comprehend what you're saying, so their eyes are going to start to glaze over. It's too hard to pay attention. You want to read at a nice pace that is easy to follow. Another thing to consider when choosing your excerpt is how much explanation is required for your listener to understand what's happening. You don't want to waste your valuable reading time explaining your story, so you need to pick a scene that can stand on its own to a certain degree. For example, in graduate school, when I gave my reading from my creative thesis, I chose a scene where one of my teenage characters is forced to take his annoying Pomeranian dog with him when he goes to buy drugs. So you have this teenage kid who's trying to sneakily have a drug deal in the park with this Pomeranian that's going nuts and calling attention to him. My listeners did not need to understand anything else that's happening in that story to enjoy that scene. I didn't have to explain where the other characters were or really even who this kid was. They could just enjoy the moment. That's the type of scene or excerpt you want to look for when you're giving a reading. And finally, you want to think about your audience. Who are they and what type of writing do they enjoy? If you're like me and reading to a bunch of people in a graduate program, they're likely interested in the literary aspect of writing. So you want to choose something that shows off your writing skills, your literary skills. If you're reading to a bunch of hard science fiction fans, you want to choose something that shows off your research and your science fiction elements. If you're reading to preschoolers, you want to choose something that's going to make them laugh. So know your audience when you are reading, just like you need to know your audience when you are trying to convince people to buy and read your book. Now, I do want to caution you about that just slightly. Don't read the only scene or poem or excerpt from your book or work that is different than the rest. So, for example, if you wrote a book of poetry, don't read the only vignette, and that's all you read, because then when someone goes to buy your book of poems, they think it's all going to be vignettes. Same thing for me, I would not have read that dog scene if it was the only funny dog scene in the book. I would have chosen something else that was more representative of the book. But Pom Pom comes back time and time again, and she is always making things difficult for the characters. So you want to choose something that still represents your work. Don't sacrifice that for your audience. So that's how you can choose your excerpt. Think about your time limit, think about something that can stand on your own, think about something that represents your book, and think about what your listeners are going to enjoy. If you can hit all 4 of those points, you've picked the right excerpt and given it the best chance to linger with your listeners and convince them that they want your book. Next, I want to share don't recite, entertain. When you're giving a reading, you are a bit of a performer in that moment. This should not be like when it's your turn to read a paragraph from a textbook in class. You don't want some monotonous, boring voice. Add a little bit of fun, add some inflection, make sure you're not speaking too fast or too slow. What all of this comes down to is practice. Practice reading your excerpt before you have to do it in public. The first time you read something out loud should not be in front of an audience. That's going to make you nervous, so you'll likely speed up and read too fast. It's probably also going to make you stumble over some words, especially if you've written some that are difficult for you to pronounce. And it's going to make it easier for you to become flustered and lose your place. So remember that the first time you read something out loud, it should not be in that important reading environment. Instead, practice at home. In my speech class, we were taught to practice in front of a mirror. I found that really awkward, so I would practice in front of my stuffed animal or my roommate. Also, when you give a reading, commit to the words you are saying. What I mean is, don't whisper, don't mumble. You don't need to shout at your audience. Just read in a normal speaking voice. And imagine that you're reading it to your child or your spouse or your best friend. Maybe you're on vacation somewhere where you're cut off from technology, and this is how you're going to entertain each other for an hour. Read as if it's only you and that other person in the room. That will give your voice some interesting inflection. It will allow you to speak at an even, pleasing pace, and it will help you not stumble over your words as much. The other thing I want to say about readings is you should read any chance you get. You need the practice for one. It's a great way to expose your writing to new people for another, and it'll help you gain confidence in your reading abilities. Next, I want to share an editor's and listener's thoughts on readings. I've been to an unfortunate number of readings. In my graduate school program, we were required to attend a lot of them. Many were authors whose style of writing I wasn't interested in, and it was an experimental program, so sometimes it didn't translate well to reading. This means I learned a lot about how to give a reading by watching people not quite do it well. I also learned that everyone in the audience wants you to be entertaining. They want you to read something interesting. They want you to succeed in your reading. They're there to see you, to listen to you. They're rooting for you. There's no one sitting in the audience hoping you do terribly. Because we have to be there, we might as well be entertained. So remember that. Remember the people are there to support you. Let your personality shine through. If you tell jokes, tell a joke. Tell a story somewhat related to the venue you're speaking at before you give your reading. Introduce yourself. Say something interesting about you. Talk about the ride there. Build a connection with your audience before and after you read, and they'll be more likely to connect with what you read. They'll also be more interested in you as a person, and therefore more interested in your book. Readings are a form of entertainment, whether we like it or not as authors, so we need to step up to that plate. If you're invited to give a reading, remember to choose your excerpt carefully, practice beforehand, and to breathe while you're giving it. How do you approach author readings? Share your process in the comments below. And for more videos on readings, other events, and other aspects of writing, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a revision checklist, which will help you get your writing ready for that reading. And now it's your turn. to choose your excerpt carefully, to practice before giving your reading, and to remember to entertain, to ignite your ink.